So how exactly does this padlock work? Well, this loop bit at the top, which is called the shackle, is wanting to be pushed up by this spring down here, but it's held down with two brass or brass looking bolts, and there are two cutouts in the shackle, and that's what the bolts are locked into. If I close that. Now, how do you pull both the bolts inwards? Well, I can show you that by a top view. When I rotate the key, you can see that the two bolt pieces both pull inwards, so it unlocks both halves of or both ends of the shackle at the same time. And the way that those are both pulled in opposite directions is at the top of the plug, this sort of rotating bit, which I really want to call the barrel, are two sticking up pins, look a bit like rabbit ears, and because they're at opposite sides of the plug, when you turn it, one moves to the right and the one at the back moves to the left, and so you can see that they pull the two brass bolts away from the shackle and release the shackle to spring out. Let's try it with the shackle down, pull them in, and the shackle springs out. So that's how you unlock the padlock, but only if you've got the key. The key is what allows the plug to rotate away from its locked position. Now, without the key, the plug won't rotate. So if I pull the key even just partially out, that's locked. And in any position other than fully inserted, I can't rotate the plug. And the reason I can't rotate the plug is because these driver pins have pushed into little holes in the plug and locked it in place. Now you can see that when the key is fully inserted, all the driver pins are aligned. Ignore the one on the left here, that just appears to be a pin that locks the plug to stop it pulling out. In any other position than fully inserted, the driver pins are misaligned, and as I pull it out, they all jump to different positions, but always misaligned. And when the key is fully out, the driver pins are misaligned. Only when I push the key fully in are they completely aligned, and they create what's called a shear point. So the driver pins and this second set of pins, these are the key pins which sit inside the plug, are all flush with the surface of the plug, so that a shear point is created and the plug holes can shear away from the driver pins. Now in this padlock, the driver pins, which are these spring-loaded pins down the bottom, are all the same length. The key pins are all different lengths. Now they may look like they're all aligned, but they're only aligned because they're sitting on top of the hills and valleys of the key. So each of these key pins sits on one of these little levels, and they're all different lengths, and only when the key pins are matched to the hills and valleys on the key do you get this flat line. In fact, it's not quite flat. Key pin number 3 looks a little bit short, but it doesn't actually seem to matter much. The shear still works. The plug can turn, shearing away from the driver pins. Now you can see that the key pins are all different lengths, because when you let them drop down in these holes, they all drop down to what looks like different levels at the top. They've all dropped down to the same level, of course, at the bottom. Now I've had to take the key out. I've had to actually pick the lock in order to rotate the plug here so that we can see these key pins. And it's worth noting that the key pins are just completely loose in their cylinders. You can see if I tip it, they all fall forwards, and if I tip it back the other way, they all drop down. So they're not sprung, they're just completely loose and pushed out by the hills and valleys of the key. So how do you pick this lock? Well, you exploit one of its weaknesses, and that is that the machining of all these parts is not very accurate, and it's that inaccuracy that lets us pick the lock. Now we need two tools. This rotational tool, which provides a little bit of rotational torque. So I've just slid that into the very end of the lock, and I'm going to just put a little bit of pressure on it to keep the plug ever so slightly rotated against these pins which are stopping it rotating. Now I'm going to do that with my little finger just to provide a bit of rotational torque. That slipped a bit. Let's put that back in. And I'm going to use the other tool to work the driver pins. That's in my way. I need to put that there. I'm going to use this to work the it's quite difficult to do, to work these driver pins, pushing them out one by one and trying to find the one that's tight. These are all loose. You can see I can work them in and out. That one's a little bit tight, but it's that fifth one that's really quite tight. Now when I push it out, I felt the plug rotate ever so slightly, and having pushed it out, it's not going to drop back in because the plug is now rotated slightly away, stopping it dropping back in. Now I need to find the next tight pin, and it looks to me like it's that second one there. So that's moved out. And I'm just going to work these so that, and there it goes. And now I can rotate the plug with my rotational torque tool. So I'll just go through that once again. So insert the rotation torque tool and just apply a little bit of pressure on there so that these pins, the driver pins that are pushed into the holes, one of them will be tight, the others will all be loose, as I say, because of bad tolerances in manufacturing. The tight one is that fifth one up there, and that has now released. That won't drop back in. I felt the plug rotate a very small amount. Number 2 now looks a little bit tight. That's come out as well. And now I can feel that this torque tool is rotating and the lock is picked. So once you understand the process for doing this, it's a simple case of putting in the torque tool, rotating it ever so slightly, working the levers, finding the tight one, and unpicking the lock. Now I've never picked a padlock before. I've picked locks on filing cabinets and cash tins and the like, but not a padlock, and this is the first time I've really understood how the mechanism inside padlocks work, and it is a relatively easy thing to pick, and you could probably do padlocks where you can't see the bits inside. Let's give that a go. So I found this padlock, and I've never picked this before. It's a bit smaller than the plastic padlock. You can see there's a bit of a size difference there. But let's give it a go. I've found a fairly fine pick tool here. So what I need to do again is put my rotational tool in there, apply a little bit of rotational torque, and now try and work the pins to, if I can get that in. Yes, sort of. Of course I can't see what I'm doing now, but I'm trying to find the one that's tight. That feels tight there. Yes, I felt the plug rotate a bit there, but I need to see if there are other tight pins. Can't find it at the moment. And because you've got to keep this rotational pressure applied, it does start to hurt your fingers a little bit. Ah, there it is. It's gone. Yes, and the padlock's come undone. Well, that's a bit of a worry, isn't it? I can pick any padlock now.